Hi, Scott. We're back again.
We sure are. It's good to be back.
Yeah, it's nice to be back. I'm just plugging in my microphone while I'm thinking about it.
Sounds
Okay,
good.
so we have the curious case of Phineas Gage. Um, this guy did not have a good day, okay? This is the ultimate definition of a bad day in September 13th, 1848 or thereabouts. So this guy was working on the railway, nothing wrong with that. And he was a foreman, right? A regular upstanding guy. Can you see him there on the left?
Sure can.
Does he look upstanding to you?
Sure does.
So he's hardworking and responsible and proud of his job. And then on the right there, we see that everybody likes and respects him. And we see the guy who runs the railway might have shaken his hand at one point, right? And he was the most efficient and capable foreman in the company. So this is it, right? The brain was working really well.
Right.
Okay. But he's got a dangerous job, as it turns out. So he's very diligent, but someone else wasn't this day. So when you are doing explosives on the railway, you're blasting through rock, right? Because you have to blast through all this rock to get the train lines down. Because trains like flat rails, they don't want to go up and down too much or side to side too much. So you have to blast through rock a lot. So you have this tamping iron, and what you do is you put all this gunpowder, which is explosive, right, in this hole that you drill, and then you're going to put sand on top of it, so that when you tamp it down, it won't explode. But you can still tamp it down. And then there's a fuse, and you light the fuse, and the fuse goes down through the sand, and then the gunpowder explodes, but in a controlled fashion, and you are long gone by then, right?
Right.
So you don't want to be around when the gunpowder explodes. But on this particular day, it's a routine day, the birds are singing, everything's fine. Someone forgot to put the sand in. And Phineas, trusting people like he did, assuming that they were responsible like he was, didn't check. So he is just going ahead and tapping down. And what do you think, Scott? Is Phineas going to have a bad day here?
Yeah, I think so. Otherwise, this would be a pretty pretty
A
boring
pretty
story.
short story, right? And you
Yeah.
know what? I'm sorry for Phineas about what happened, but it was the best thing ever for psychology, right? This was
Right.
this was probably the most instructive incident in the history of psychology.
Wow.
Okay, so kaboom! I don't know if you can see it, but there's an explosion here.
I can.
And what happens is the iron bar goes through his head.
Wow.
And the picture here with the skull shows where it goes through. It enters in his left cheek and goes up through his head, exiting sort of near the top of the head. Okay. And not only does it go up, but it keeps flying. And the force of the explosion throws him onto his back. Okay. The good thing is that the thing that saved him was that the tamping iron had a point. So it was a pointy end that went through his brain and therefore was able to exit relatively easily and didn't just take the whole head off with it, right?
Wow. So it completely went through.
Yep. And it landed 80 feet away. This is an iron bar, a fairly large iron bar, okay? This is not a knitting needle. This is maybe 1 or 2 inches in diameter. This is a
Wow.
huge iron thing flying through your office, through your head at maybe, I don't know, 50, 100 miles an hour. I'm not even sure of the force of the explosion. So what happens is a huge part of his brain is wiped out. And as we know, or as we will know, the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex is so important that left side is pretty much gone. And the left side is a particularly important part for much of cognitive control.
Hmm.
So he's lost. He's lost in an instant all his cognitive control. But people didn't know that in those days. But they observed the symptoms, and this allowed them to figure out the functioning of the brain and demonstrated once and for all that the brain is a machine. Okay, so we go ahead, you see what happens. I must admit, this kind of looks like it's going through his back, but it doesn't. And it's sort of, this picture is a little bit off, but because you see the real exit is here, right? But at least it
Right.
gives you the idea. So miraculously, Phineas survives this horrifying accident. People are running, they help him, they put him on a cart, they wheel him over to town, they put him in the doctor's office, right? Or the doctor puts him in a bed. Within 5 minutes, the sheets are covered in blood. Okay. Phineas coughs. A teaspoon of brain falls out of his head.
That's terrible. You should have a
This is a true
disclaimer.
story. This is a true story, 1948, right?
Oh man.
So, but what's most important is he's a transformed person, right?
Right.
His personality is transformed. So what do you think this is teaching us, Scott, about how the brain works?
Well, I mean, I think the fact this is probably the first time that we've ever seen like a really large portion of the brain removed and still
Yeah, this is like surgery, but a pretty severe form of
yeah, very
surgery.
extreme surgery. And then we're just going to see how they respond now, like just how they act as a person. Because usually, if you're losing that much of your brain, you're not surviving afterwards.
That's right. The miraculous thing was that Phineas Gage lived for another 13 years.
Wow.
Okay, so he still died young, but he did get 13 years, and therefore lots of observation. He wasn't tracked closely by physicians, unlike HM, which we'll talk about later in the course, but still, or sometime in the course, but still, we got a lot of information. So this is the doctor's letter that was written. So Dr. Harlow commented on this case, and we see there, this is still the same month it happened. He is fitful, irreverent, indulging at times in the grossest profanity. So this is a person who, before, was very well mannered, an excellent foreman, and now is more beastly, right? So what we've learned, I think, about this is that all of us have in the brain these multiple kinds of capabilities, and then we have cognitive control, which turns the beast into a person, right? But take away the cognitive control, and suddenly we see the person, like if a person swears a lot and they have an addiction, maybe again you're wiping out the cognitive control, and you're seeing what's happening when the rest of the brain takes over. So it's not a pretty sight, necessarily, Scott.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting.
But presumably, if we were able to put an iron bar, not that we'd want to, through your prefrontal cortex, we might find that you would also change in a similar fashion.
Well, let's hope that that doesn't happen. At least before this course is finished, right?
Yeah, well, that's what we all hope for. But a good stroke, a well-placed stroke, can do the same thing, right? So someone
Right.
my age, could wake up one morning and part of the brain's just gone. Okay, so the beast comes out, as you can see in this picture, and his friends and acquaintances said he was a different person. He was no longer the same person. So this is kind of frightening in a way, because it means that if an accident happened to us like this, like a severe car accident or something, we also could be completely rewired and changed. And I knew this, right? There was a person I knew, and he was very sort of arrogant and clever and whatever. He was a doctor. I won't say any more about it. But then he had a bike accident, and I think a pretty bad bike accident with some head injury. And when I met him later, he was a changed person, right? So I met him about 10 or 15 years later, and it was hard to recognize him as the same person in terms of his manner.
Mm.
In some ways, I liked him better after the accident. But then in the end, he committed suicide, and I suspect that part of it was the results of the brain injury. So,
Wow.
yeah, I've seen this change happen in people, and I think it happens in many people. The same way with people with strokes,
Yeah,
suddenly
absolutely.
change.
Even in the NFL, that's a huge part of it,
Yes,
like sports
absolutely.
too.
There are so many cases of people who committed suicide and got depressed in the NFL, and they think it's because of all the hits they took to the head.
Yeah.
Let's not start on with NHL or rugby.
Fair enough. That's a whole
I try and pretend that doesn't happen in rugby, coming from New Zealand.
other.
Okay, so you know what? I mean, what kind of job could Phineas do when he didn't have any executive function? Do you think?
Right. I mean, maybe like a service job where he doesn't need to think about or like take in new information. Like, I guess if it's like some sort of manual labor that's not really intellectually laborious.
Yeah, like maybe a train conductor who just has to take tickets or something. Even
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
might be too much. I don't know. Okay, but it turns out, okay, so he spent a few years in the circus, and he didn't really have a job except he could hold the iron bar that went through his head and show people the blinded eye, and generally just talk about what happened, and everybody would look at him with amazement, right? So he was basically a spectacle in I think it was Barnum and Bailey Circus or Ringling Brothers, I forget which. So anyway, he's in the circus, he's a spectacle, and then he goes to Chile. How he gets there, I have no idea. Maybe he meets someone from Chile and they go back. Anyway, eventually he becomes a stagecoach driver, which is a perfect job for him because it doesn't require executive functioning. He's just following a path, right? He gets on, he just has to like follow the horses. The horses know where to go. So, and he's delivering cargo between cities. So what we learned from this whole thing is that executive functioning is really important, and it seems to be associated with the part of the brain that got destroyed in Phineas Gage. So psychologists really understood for the first time, perhaps, that for sure the brain is a machine, and that there are certain parts that they're associated with certain kinds of resource or activity. And if you lose them, you lose the activity and the resource. Okay, so Phineas Gage teaches us the importance of the prefrontal cortex for executive functioning, and the importance of executive functioning for not only task performance but management of behavior and regulation of behavior. So yeah, back in 1848, this terrible accident really kick-started modern psychology.
Wow. And here we are.
And here we are. Thanks, Scott. We'll
Thanks,
talk
Mark.
again later. Yeah, bye.
Yeah.